this is Karen and I are going to, Karen Allen, Evaluating and Extending Your Farm Business. We're going to go through some resources that we have. We placed this right after Kenda's talk because we have some more general resources in general. And then we're going to go in at the last half of our presentation and show how to maybe you can calculate some of the effects of these different percentage changes in inflation and other stuff. And so it's not going to tell you what to do, but maybe we can tell you how to pull the information together and what effect that might have on your business to be able to do your own analysis. And so I'm Ruby Ward, and I've been the co-chair of this conference since the beginning, along with Katie Wagner, who's hovering in the background and handling lots of different things for the conference. And Karen Allen, and so I'm an economist here in applied economics. I deal mostly with agriculture entrepreneurship. And Karen is a food scientist, and she's the professor in the Department of Nutrition, Dietetics, and Food Sciences. And she really kind of looks at things from the food business side of things and stuff. And so we've started doing a lot of different programs together and are thinking together about how do we help some of these really small businesses. And so, and how do we evaluate that? So it's been kind of nice to be able to do that joint thinking on this topic. So we're going to go through this together and kind of go back and forth. So feel free, Karen, to chime in when you want to chime in.
Sure. So a big part of what's been really helpful with Ruby and I working together is I approach things not just from the entrepreneurship, people who want to start a food company, but I look really closely at what those regulations are. I've said a food business is the hardest thing to start. You can start a business making jewelry and you can sit on your couch while you're watching TV and do that. But the regulatory side, in terms of the food safety, even just talking about, oh, it says my sound quality is not good, so I'm going to turn off my video and hopefully that will help. Let me know if that's maybe.
Yeah, it's a little bit better now. And I think just
okay.
kind of when you're a little bit closer to the mic.
Yeah, yeah. So when we look at some of these regulations around food businesses, even like Kenda mentioned in her presentation, she has growers that are now, instead of using glass jars, they're using plastic bottles, maybe for a jam or a sauce that they're making. There are a lot of considerations that you have to look at from the standpoint of the safety. Can you still process that product the same way? Can you heat it to the same temperature? Can you handle that product using a different package? But that's a real consideration, and it's something that if you're doing value-added processing, you might need to make a package shift, but you need to be looking at all of those different things that it affects, not just your bottom line. So Ruby and I have worked together to look at how can we get some of those regulatory decisions or some of the things that might influence the safety of your product, or just the different options you have, the different regulatory frameworks for how you can make that product, and combine that with the business side, your business plan, your marketing, who is your customer. So we've spent a lot of years talking about how we combine our disciplines to come together in a way that is the most helpful for our entrepreneurs. And that is, the result of that is this series of FRAME resources. So I'm going to let Ruby talk a little bit about those.
So FRAME is Fundamental Resources for Agriculture Entrepreneurs. And so this is the kind of the start of it, and we are going to continue to build out materials and things. So we've done different things, but the idea is not just for these food businesses, but then as we started working with those, we realized we already were thinking about this beforehand, but really it's the same type of questions that you have to ask for all different types of businesses. And so we're just kind of putting different information here, and there we go. So these are some guidebooks that we've put together, and we'll continue to do more of those, but we would encourage you to go get on the website, look at these. There's an evaluation form that's also there too, or it will be in the next week. And so then come back and give us some evaluations and feedback on this so that we know kind of where to head with it. But the blue ones on this side are general ones. So are you ready to start a business? And then planning to a product business or a service business. So these are kind of the general ones. And then over here, we've started to do some specific ones, and then we'll add more. And so a livestock operation, a cosmetic business, which might sound like it has nothing to do with this audience, but if you're using like honey or one of our, some of our products in a cosmetic business, then there's different regulations for that. And then a home-based food business. So the feedback form that we'll have up there next week and ongoing will then ask you, what are some other ones that we really should do, and what do you think of these? And we'll get into a little bit more of the details about this.
So we're going to start by walking through an example. If you want to start making raspberry jam to kind of expand that product line, maybe you have raspberries that you can't sell at the end of the week at a farmer's market, and this would be a way to still use some of those raspberries, have product that you could sell later into the year, say at a holiday festival. So we're just going to use this as an example, partly because the recipe for raspberry jam is pretty simple. You've got raspberries, sugar, pectin, and lemon juice. So it's not a horribly complex example to use. But the first thing you need to do is look around and decide, where would you, who is that customer that you're going to sell it to? Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep. And so, and this whoops, went too far. So one of the things before I go to the next slide, we've got two different places here in the grocery store that we took pictures of. And there's that general jam aisle that everybody's in. And then there's also a few jams over in more of the deli section of the thing. And so depending on who your customer is and where you're going to sell that to, that's part of determining where's the best place even in the store, who's your customer. Because I think different customers are going to these two different spots in the store. Okay. Here we are.
Okay, so for each of these guidebooks, we step through the different questions that you need to consider. We'll give you all the way through. Sometimes it might seem like it bounces around from making your product or packaging your product into some of the business side and then back more to the production side. But that's because we've tried to go through and think about these in the order that is most helpful for you to ask some of these questions and start working on your answers and what your next steps are in the process.
And by the time you get through some of this material, I don't call these those, but in some ways I kind of think these are sketchbooks. So this is going to help you gather some information and sketch out your ideas. And then that can start to kind of bring that together, but it's a way to kind of get you started as you're looking through and make sure you've covered a bunch of different areas. And so this is just one of the individual pages. And so at the top of it, you're going to have a main question. So what's the big question? In this case, it's who are your customers and why will they buy from you? And then we don't want to just leave you hanging and like, so what does that question mean? And so we're going to give you a little bit of an explanation, but this is not tons and tons of material to read through because it's really just, but there's going to be some more probing questions in there, some things to consider, just a little bit more details. And then we're also going to give you an example. And the examples are not always really, really involved, but it's a way to kind of illustrate what those are and give you some ideas on how to start to put your example together. And then there's your plan. So a place to write down your ideas, your sketchbook. This is what I am doing. but we know that you're not going to know everything necessarily as you go through, or there might be some things you still need to check into, you're still deciding. And so there's also a spot to put your next step. So if you fill this out, it's not a lot of information to fill out, but it's a way to really kind of pull it together. And also, as you look at these next steps, that you can keep notes on, how do I move this plan forward? How do I get more details? How do I answer more questions?
And our hope is that as you go through these workbooks, by the end of it, you have more information that then could go directly into a business plan, or that you could use with a business advisor, someone like the Women's Business Center or SCORE or our small business development centers, to actually really take those first concrete steps towards getting that part of your business going, whether it's a new thing or it's an expansion or a way to do value added. This will at least give you something to start that more formal business discussion.
Because a lot of times the questions that we have at the tops of these pages are going to be those questions that somebody will stop and ask you, well, where do you think you're going to sell that product? Who are you going to sell that product to? You know what and so all some of these other things, and then you can at least have thought about these before you're kind of put on the spot and need to answer those types of questions. If you're working with somebody else too, this could be a way for you to come together and have those discussions and kind of articulate between the two of you what your plans are going to be. So here's continuing on with the raspberry jam example. We have some different national brand competitors, and these are going to be in that general aisle in the store where you have all the jams. And so you can see that Smucker's red raspberry jam, always a classic, is $3.68 for an 18-ounce jar, and there's a generic version at Kroger or Smith's for $2.59 for the same jar. And then Smucker's has their specialty jam that's in a jar for about the same price, but a much smaller jar. It's only a 10-ounce jar. And so these are kind of, if you want to compete directly and sell to the same customers that are going to buy a national type brand, this is who your competitors are. And I think it's good to go out and see. And one of the steps in this is to go find out who is that competition. And I think this is where Kinda was also saying, go around and find out what those prices are, like at the farmer's market or something else. And so this is what we've started to do just for raspberry jam. And the first step was just finding the national competitors.
So the next slide, we actually have a few brands that are more of a specialty type product. Smaller jar sizes, closer to 10 ounces, premium price. One of these is a local product. One is considered an artisan product. There's another one that's pectin free, which usually means they end up having a little lower sugar. So these are some of the specialty options, and it gives you a better idea what those specialty brands are charging. If this is where you see your product more directly competing with these, you can see there's quite a difference in price. We're going from about $7 to $9 for these specialty products. So assuming that your competition, you've identified some local producers, and that's who you want to compare your product to, and you need to start looking at some of those prices. On the next slide, we have 3 different local jams. One is a larger size frozen jam. One is a much larger size, a 20-ounce jar, but there's still a local company. And then we have the Pepper Lane, which again is a local company that's more of a premium brand. We looked at 2 different associated food stores, one Lee's Marketplace in Cache Valley, and then another in Salt Lake City on the East Bench that we figure Dan's Foods tends to cater to a little more upscale customer a lot of the time. So we looked at prices for these 3 different brands in January of 2021, and then again just this week to see how much those prices have changed over the last year. You can see there's quite a spread. Some of them are going up by over 10% in the last year. Some are the same brand, but in the different outlet dropped by closer to 10%. This shouldn't be taken as, oh, okay, I can immediately raise my prices by 10%, but it's more of a way to start paying attention to what's happening with your competitors and gathering some data on your own in a simple spreadsheet so you can start to look over time for those trends, not just things where it maybe bounces around a little bit or is more of a price adjustment. For example, maybe Weeks decided, you know, they're not charging enough at Lee's Marketplace, they're charging too much at Dan's Food. Maybe it had nothing to do with the producer, but had to do exclusively with those two stores that were offering that. But you can see it looks like for this February, that price for Weeks Jam kind of self-corrected, and it's being sold for the same price at both of those outlets. This is a way for you, though, to see those general trends. Another 6 months from now, do we see generally prices going up overall, or do we see them starting to drop? So it's not necessarily the best way to decide exactly how much you're going to charge, but are you in this right price range, and does it look like it's time for you to raise your prices by 5 or 10%, or maybe to drop your prices so that you remain competitive?
And I think that it can be interesting too. We just did this at grocery stores because we happen to have them for January 2021. So it was easy to do the comparison. But like Kinda said, there's some of the stuff that we had, a previous study had been done at the farmers markets. And so you can really just kind of hone in on what you want. But even if you're planning on selling at a farmer's market, I think it is nice to really kind of look at what these grocery store prices are too, and then start to see how they're comparing to the farmer's market prices, to just give you another kind of piece of data. And I don't think you have to take a lot of time to do this. We got these prices through an online grocery app to buy groceries online and have them delivered to your house. But also, like when you're buying your own groceries, just every so often, just kind of jot those down. And so we're going to switch gears and go into how to actually kind of start to put the numbers together to everything that we're going on here. So this is a budget that we put together for Raspberry Jam in doing that guidebook. And we considered like how long it would take us to do these and stuff. So it's for 8-ounce jars. These are a little bit smaller than the jars that were in the grocery store for specialty. Those were about a 10-ounce jar. And so these are 8-ounce jars. Is to sell 500 of them. We've got a price in here right now of $5. And then we've got the various expenses down here. So as Karen said, we're using this because it's raspberry sugar, and we're actually adding a little bit of pectin and lemon juice, but you don't need to for all raspberry jams. And then jars and lids and labels. And so we don't have a lot of different inputs here. So it's a nice one to just illustrate how to kind of go through and do some of this analysis. And so we've also got the labor down here. There's 2 ways to do your labor. If you're paying somebody else to do it, then you definitely want to put your hours in here. But if this is your own business that you're doing it yourself, then you can not include your labor up here, because your labor, the return for you is from your profit for the overall business, not an hourly wage. And so you can do the difference between those. And you can also, so down here, we're leaving the labor out because they're going to do it themselves. The transportation, we've got some information in here. So we assume that there's going to be 5 times you go to a farmer's market or to booths at like a festival or something like that. and we put in $40 for that, 48 cents a mile for the transportation. So we've got some of this here for the marketing, application fee, credit card processing fees, miscellaneous. And then do you have to rent a kitchen or do you do it out of your house? You know, so there's some of those considerations that we can change, some licensing fees and food handlers permit. So we add up all the costs here. We've got the expenses, the net income, and I just out of curiosity put in a net income per hour, and this turns out to be about $9 an hour for this budget the way that it was. So this is a budget, and so if you have this type of information, then here's how you can start to do the analysis. And so, and we'll post this Excel file. So I've got the raspberry jam, and then this is sensitivity analysis, and this is for the raspberry jam. So I've put the numbers from that budget into here. We've got the revenue that was $2,500. I separated out our supplies, our ingredients from our supplies. And Karen, why do you think it's a good thing to maybe separate out those two?
So one of the biggest issues is if you lump all those together just as general inputs, your ingredients might be perishable. If you are purchasing raspberries, if you have to buy extra raspberries beyond just the extra that you might have left over, you have a limited amount of time to use those raspberries and have a high quality jam come from that. So by separating out ingredients and then other supplies, things like glass jars, lids and rings, labels, you could have enough supplies on hand for the next 6 months to a year and not have to worry about shelf life concerns, as long as you have a place to store them and keep them clean. For the ingredients, you might be looking at having to purchase smaller quantities more frequently just because of shelf life issues. And so you might end up paying a little more for some of those food ingredients versus some of the supplies that you can keep on hand for a much longer time. You can get a better deal on those potentially.
So then we, like I said, there's a couple ways to do labor. This is an operation that it's the owners doing everything, and so their return is going to come down into the net income or the profit. And then the marketing costs, we said there's a lot of transportation costs in those marketing costs, plus our booth rentals and things. And then overhead for the licenses, the fees, but we're doing it out of our kitchen, so we don't have to have any, and we don't have a lot of equipment that's going to be depreciating for this. And so we take all these expenses, those add up to $1,700. Our revenue is $2,500. And so down here, our net income is just calculated the difference between those two numbers, the revenue minus the expenses. The other thing that's important here, we separated out the overhead or the fixed costs from the other expenses. And out of every basically dollar of revenue, 61 cents is going towards these expenses here, the ingredients, supplies, labor, and marketing, which is leaving 39% to cover our overhead, our taxes, and then give us a profit down here. So this is called a margin, and a margin is a really important number to kind of keep track of. But in this case, it was 39%. And pre-tax, we're at $769 of income or net income, and after tax, $692. So with this, we also have this column here in the blue that we can go in and we can put in different percentage changes, and then that'll calculate over here in these other columns what this might look like for us. And so we can use some of that information that Kinda had in her presentation about some of these changes in prices and stuff. So like marketing, this was about 2/3 or half, I think, transportation costs. So the fuel prices, Kinda, I think, said what up by about 30%. So let's assume that this might go up by like 15%. because it's only, it's not all, well, I think the transportation, so if we put that in there, you can see that that alone took our margin from 39 cents to 35 cents, but that's going to cause our overall profit after taxes to go down by 13%. And so then we can start to see like how some of these changes would do and what it's going to do to us. And then we could also start to see some of the other changes. And I'm going to look back over here because I can't remember what some of the prices were that Kinda gave us, some of those percentages that I was going to put in. So over here we see that Kinda said that overall inflation went up by about 7%. And so if I assume that my supplies increased by 7%, and if I assume my ingredients also increase by 7%, that shows that I'm going to have a 21% drop in my profit this next year. But if I just increase my prices by say like 6% up here, that's going to about take care of it. And that was that general overall consumer prices rose by 7%. So if we put the 7% in there, we're right up to about where we are. However, the food price index and food for grocery stores is about 6.5%. So if I put that in, you can see that we're kind of back to just kind of about equal to where we are. So with this kind of a mix of costs and returns, a 7% increase in our price, 7% increases in our ingredients and supplies, but a 15% increase in our marketing costs because of that transportation, that would cause this business to stay about profit about equal to where it was the year before. What other things would you say, Karen, that like sorry, go ahead.
So fresh fruit went up about 17%. So you might just for fun look at that. So the revenue side, so the farm gate price for fresh fruit.
Okay. This is raspberry jam. So that would be
I know, but I mean, like if you're producing your own berries, I guess is what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so that so if you're producing your own berries, you don't have more than higher cost there, but you're actually able to increase your price by 17% because the fresh fruit's gone up that much, then that would do this. If you increase the price by what the grocery store price has gone up, but your raspberries, you're buying them, then, and those go up by 17%, then that's going to put you at like a 5% down here. And so this is just the most simple way that I have to kind of be able to put some of those assumptions together and start to see how they play together. Because it's not just a single assumption here, but it's how the assumptions across the board. And so this is where you're changing these assumptions, but you're also considering what these assumptions were from if I'm kind of the same as my starting point is where I was last year. And so you don't need a lot of numbers from your operation, but we need a few. And it depends. So in this case, it was raspberry jam, and this is the combination that we have. But if I go over to, I also did this for a cut flour example. Go ahead.
Sorry, really quick before you leave the raspberry. What if, since I'm doing this in my home kitchen, what if I notice that my energy cost goes up? So it costs me more to turn my stove on and actually cook and process those jars of jam. Where does that expense go on this if I'm changing it?
It probably was here in your overhead. And so if you have some of that in there, we could actually increase this by like 10% or something too, because it's probably not all the costs, but in general, some of those are going up. But if everything's going to go up by about 7% and some of these others are going up by 20 or 30, you may say it's 10% here, you might say it's 15%. The other thing is that I like about this is you don't have to know what this is. And some of it is maybe because sometimes as a business owner, I might say, okay, I can handle this much of a drop in my profit. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be good for my family, but I can handle it. And so then you can kind of start to look at some worst case scenarios and see what might be on a bad side. If my prices really go up and say these go up by, this is the drop that I would be looking at. And so you can start to look at some of these extreme examples and just say, how sensitive is everything to what's going on with my operation? And so it's just a way to really do this. The other thing you can do is, as a new business, if this is something that you're thinking, I have excess raspberries. What if I just wanted to do them and start a raspberry jam along with what I'm doing? Then maybe I say this is only down by 50% because I'm not going to have to buy my raspberries, and I'm going to have to buy some of my other stuff. And then with the inflation, maybe we increase these by 10%, maybe this one's 15%. But actually, I'm going to go lower because I already go to the farmer's market for everything else that I'm selling. And so if I just have my raspberry jam there too, it's not going to be the full cost there to go there. And then you can kind of see where, under this scenario, this is more of a partial budget, because now I'm saying I'm going to take out some of these costs that I don't have to pay for the raspberry jam because I'm already doing my raspberries and my other stuff at my farmer's market booth or my CSA, and this is just an add-on. So what changes with the add-on? And if you listen to Ryan's presentation on Tuesday, he talked about a partial budget. So we've essentially turned this into a partial budget for raspberry jam by doing that. So it's pretty versatile to just look at several different things.
So some other things just to point out that could go into overhead would be, for example, if you are licensed under the Cottage Kitchen, the Cottage Production Act, if that license fee goes up, you could see that could go into overhead. You could change a percentage there. If you know the cost for your business license is going to go up in overhead, those might be some other things that just kind of generically go into that overhead column, anticipating some of those other increases. We had just had a question about that, so I wanted to talk about some of the other things that could go there.
So let's see. There we go. Okay. Would you have these Excel spreadsheets? So this is the same spreadsheet that you could use for livestock, hay, everything. So the only thing, if I was doing this for livestock, is what I would do is I would, where this has ingredients, I would type feed here. And then have my other supplies here, because feed is one of your primary costs for a livestock operation. And then from your own operation, you just need to grab, what were my sales last year? How much did I pay for feed? How much did I pay for all my other expenses? Do I have my labor, my marketing expense? Is there, my fixed cost is going to be your insurance, depreciation on your equipment, any, those types of things and stuff. Put those in. Here's for a tax rate. And you've basically got your livestock one. And you can do the same thing for hay. You just have to find your own things. These ones over here, nothing's protected here, so you can change it. But I would not want to get more than a few of these, because if you start to get too many of these, then you just have so many things going on the page, you can't really pay attention to it. And we are, I sent it to them, but they didn't get it posted on the website yet, but it'll be posted by tomorrow morning. And so if you just go back to this conference site where you've been clicking to join the sessions, you'll be able to download this Excel file. I don't publish it broadly because I don't have good explanations on how to use it without, something live like this, but where you know how to use it, then I'm happy to share it. And the business license question, what do you think, Karen?
So I was going to say some of that kind of goes outside of what we're talking about in this particular presentation, but my contact information is included So if you have questions about a business license to be able to sell at the farmer's market, things like liability, product liability insurance, I have a lot of materials that we've presented other times that I am more than happy to share with you. If you want to email me directly, I could even maybe pull up some of that information and we could post it as a resource under this session.
And so then also the question came in about paying for yourself. So technically, if you own your own business, then this is how you pay taxes. You pay taxes on the profit from your business, and then you get the after-tax profit. So there's reasons to say, okay, I need to have this number at the bottom be high enough for this to make it worth, I'm getting enough returns back for all the headaches and time I'm putting into this business. And this is for my time, this is for my mental stress, this is for all the assets that I have at risk here, all of that. And this return needs to be high enough for that. However, sometimes it's hard to kind of calculate, you know, well, I just want to pay for the time, plus I want to have something for the stress and everything of running the business. So there is nothing wrong with saying, I need to have this much labor up here just for my time. And then everything down here is what I get extra for just running this business and taking the chances and, you know, all the stress and everything else that I do for the business. And so you're getting two different types of returns for it. It's just a matter of how it makes sense for you to do it. From an economic standpoint, both methods are correct. And I've seen people use both because some people want to say, this number is my full return back to me. I want to do my planning, so this number is high enough for everything. Others say, I need to pay myself at least this much, the equivalent of this much per hour, or this much for the season. And then is this business going to be able to pay me this plus bring in something in addition to that? And so it's really just kind of what makes sense for the way that you psychologically think about it. And I've done both, and it doesn't, they both have their own purposes. And so we talked about kind of, somebody asked about like hay and grain. There's also, Kendall, will you post the link for where our budgets are for the department? Because there are some hay and grain budgets that they could actually, or hay and livestock budgets that they could start.
I'll do that right now.
And then I took a flower budget that we had. I think that the numbers that I put in here were a combination of our budget for snapdragons and peonies, because that's what I had. And so this, you can see that this was a 31%. Over here, I'm going to take this back out. This was a 39%, but this is having all the labor back down here. The flower budget is putting in the labor for just the time that it takes to do everything into this budget, but it's not putting in the money that you need as the owner labor, you know what I mean, to just kind of manage the operation as a whole. This is to get the seeds planted, to get the flowers cut, to, you know what I mean, do all of that type of stuff. And so this was a budget from, I think, like 2020. And so if we wanted to take this budget and kind of make it more into what it was today, I think we've had like a 6% increase in price in our supplies in general. Maybe some of those a little bit higher. Labor has gone up though by like 25%. And then marketing, again, that's some of the transportation, some of that stuff is fairly stable. In this case though, so we might see that that's going up, you know, so you can start to see, well, if I have to face all of those things in this cut flower business, that's cutting my profits down, and, you know, over half, 57%. Is bringing that margin down in half from 31% a dollar to 16 cents a dollar. So what you know, but if flowers, you know, if they go up by the same as everything, 22%, that brings it back up. It still is at a loss. If they go up by 15%, we're back down to about even with these types of increases. So that's a 25% increase in labor and a 20% increase in marketing. But from what I've seen with flowers, these numbers are not stable across all cut flower operations. These are very, depending on the type of flower that you're growing, where you're selling them. Are you selling it wholesale? Are you selling them retail? Are you doing a combination? Are you selling arrangements at farmers markets? You know, are you doing events and wedding? Are you doing education and stuff? So all of those things can change. And so it really does change the structure of these costs. And so it'll change the effects of percentage changes on that. But this is just to kind of show differences in, you know, the raspberry jam versus this one. So it's important to just find these numbers, but you really only need to know like 4 or 5 numbers from your operation to do something like this. And I wouldn't let the idea that I'm not sure some of your costs, whether you should put them on this line or this line or this line, get keep you from doing this, because it really doesn't matter. This is for your purpose. And so put them on the line that it makes sense to you. And then as long as you're consistent in your year to year, you can really kind of use this at any time to think about it. And so I think I've got, this one was, sorry, I think it's, oh, vegetables. So this was Kenda's budget that she put together. This was the small scale mixed, a 2-acre mixed vegetable budget for, I think it was southeastern Utah, 2 acres in 2016. I think, was it your southeast? I think it was the southeastern Utah one that Kenda put together. And that's available on those budgets that she put the link in the chat box. And so let's just think about this one. So our supplies, say again, those have gone up by like 10%. Our labor, maybe 25%. Marketing costs, about 15%. So that's going to cause a huge decline in our profit. But so we've got to change our prices, and you can start to see that. And this was a 2016 budget, and so I might not have, labor is probably about right, maybe it's a little bit under, but you can start to see kind of where you need to make some changes and stuff, and what combination. So in this case, we're going to need like around a 15% increase in the prices compared to this combination of increase in expenses. And so it just puts control. The idea behind stuff like this for me, this was all the same worksheet. I just took these green numbers and changed them to fit different situations. And so you can take it and just put these numbers in to fit your own situation. And if you have more than one business, just have more than one version that you can change to. If I was doing this though, after I downloaded it, I would say one copy that kind of was clean that I could go back to. So in case by mistake you type a number in here and you lose, it's no longer calculating correctly because it's not a number, not a formula. And so I would just save a clean copy that, so in case you type in something that you should have said, oh, what did I do? It's not working right. You have a version that you can go back to and start over. So I just saved more than one copy of it. The question is, I see, is there something that's putting together also factors in how much space a crop uses? I think it's called opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is a general concept that basically says that if I'm looking between different options on what to do with something, I need to think about the opportunity that I'm giving up as a cost for being able to do something else. And so if I was thinking about, do I want to have, so it like, this is the flower budget. So do I want to have ranunculus versus anemones versus snapdragons or peonies or something? Then I could start to say, how do I choose between those? And if I'm going to grow snapdragons, I got to give up that space. That space can no longer grow peonies, so I have to give it up, or vice versa. Peonies are a perennial and snapdragons are an annual, so those might not be a good example. But So say zinnias and snapdragons. So if I'm going to grow zinnias and I have to not grow snapdragons, I can't grow two things on that same piece of, that same square foot of ground. So one way to do that is to take the costs like down from your revenue minus these expenses for each of those options and look at it on what you're making per square foot. And then that starts to say, well, if I'm going to grow one thing, I'm giving up the opportunity to have made this much per square foot by doing this other thing. And so you just want to kind of say that I'm making choices between these. How do I pick the one that makes sense for me? And so it's just basically doing your budget on a square foot basis. So I don't actually have a flower budget in here, but we could actually, the idea is that I could, over here on my raspberry jam budget, I did a per unit. And so my unit here is my jar of jam. But on, if this was for like ranunculus or zinnias or something, my unit might be a square foot, or it might be a per stem. I can do, kind of define that unit how I want to define that unit. And so basically then I just go through and I divide all of these numbers by the number of units I have. And then I have a column that for every jar of jam, this is what it's doing for me. And I can look at my raspberry jam one to look at what it's costing me per jar of jam, because says this is what it's going to cost me for all those inputs. I'm paying $1.73 a jar. Here's my labor cost. Here's my marketing cost per jar, my facilities. And so in total, I've got $3 into those variable costs for this jar of jam. I could also then, and I'm able to sell it for $5. And so the difference between those would be my margin that I'm getting per unit. And you could do that same thing for per square foot, or probably per square foot, because your land is your opportunity. What do I put on this piece of land? And so you could calculate that for different types of flowers and then start to look at that concept. So it's the same kind of thing, but just how do we pull the numbers? It starts though with needing to have some kind of understanding of your costs and returns. And then here's the vegetable one. I've got one more thing, or a couple more things. Let's see if I can get them. My closed captioning is there, so it's not letting me click here. So I'm just going to make my screen size a little smaller. Let's see. So that I can see this. Okay. So this other one, another way to do it is just to take like your income statement, but it's the same type of thing that I have on that sensitivity one, but here's just a different way. Instead of looking at what percentage changes and stuff, you can just look at a single year. So your budget could be as simple as this, but just taking your information from the year before. And then this is sales needed. So going back to our raspberry jam, or let's do the flower one. So this was 31% for our margin, 27% for our margin after we made some changes. And our fixed cost is $3,044. So if I take those numbers, 31% and $3,044, and I go over here, I put my overhead expenses of $3,044, and my margin was 31%. And so if I'm wanting to take, and as an owner, I want to make like 10,000 from this business, it says with this combination of overhead, and that's my margin, I've got to sell $42,000 worth to make that 10% or $10,000. Say I still want to make the $10,000, but now my margin's gone back down by, to say 27%. I've got to now sell $48,000 to get that same profit back out of the business, that $10,000. So this allows you to look at 2 or 3 different options at the same time. And you just need to know this margin percent and your overhead. And then you can start to see how that affects how many sales dollars you need to reach those goals. And so whether you're a larger business, a smaller business, a really small like business, or you're getting started and stuff, the other thing that I've used this for, like with the raspberry jam, let's go over and let's grab some raspberry jam numbers again. So 2,500 was what it started out with. And then my margin's 39%. So let's do that. So 2,500 and 39%. Oh, I put in the sales instead of the overhead. Let's just put in $500 for overhead. So, and sorry. Okay. All right. So I need, my overhead is $215. My margin is 39%. And right now I'm making $692. Or let's do the 769. Okay, so I want 769 out of this business. My overhead was, I think, 250, and my margin was 2. So that tells me kind of what sales dollars I need here. But say I want to grow my business up to where I'm making like $5,000, and maybe I want to grow it to where I'm making, you know, in $25,000, then I can put those numbers in going over and start to set some sales goals for my future, for my planning. But maybe as I grow this business, I know that my overhead's going to grow up. So maybe I'm putting in like $500 here and say like $1,000 here. And so that will tell me kind of where I need to grow to. And if I'm selling like jars of jam and I know that I'm selling them for $5 or $6 or something, that can then, I can even take this number and divide it by that to say how many jars do I have to sell to reach those goals. But this is a way that you can kind of do that planning out for the future too. And you could also look side by side, and so 769, but see if our margin goes down to say like 35% because of increases in costs or inflation, that'll tell us kind of how many dollars we need to increase our sales by just to kind of stay at the same point. And so these are just different ways to not get so, not have to do the math yourself. It'll do the math for you, but you don't need tons and tons of information to start to put your ideas together and think, well, what if this, what if this, what is this? So I haven't really been monitoring this. Are there any other questions, Karen, that have come in or that you were wondering about?
There's just one other question about flowers. So since different flowering plant species can have very different numbers of flower stems, wouldn't a dollars per stem unit cost be more meaningful than $1 per square foot when comparing alternative plant species?
So,
I
right.
would,
go ahead.
I would agree with that, but I think that might get to be very confusing because if you're trying to look at space usage, how do you predict that? So if you have a rough idea of how many stems you would get per square foot, I think it would make the spreadsheet a little easier. Just
so it depends on,
you can do it either way.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It depends on what you're doing. So the idea behind the opportunity cost is what's your limiting factor? And so if you only have like 1/8 of an acre or something else, you've only got so many square feet you can grow on, then you want to convert things to square foot to be able to make the decision between which, you know, what's that return back to you per square foot. And so that's why we look at a per square foot number when we're trying to say, allocate between what's the opportunity cost between these different ones, because land is our most limiting factor. However, you sell flowers in terms of stems, right? And so getting your returns per stem makes a lot of sense if you want to really kind of look at that crop and then look at it between years. What did I make per stem this year? I might have changed some growing conditions, other types of things, maybe where I'm marketing it to, other stuff. So what am I making per stem after that, making those changes and stuff. So yeah, there's different ways to do it. And so back over on this budget, actually some of the budgets that we do, we have more, it could be per jar, and then it could be per, you could have one, like with cattle, we do like per hundredweight that you sell your calves for, we do it per head of cows, you know, so the moms, we do it per, you know what I mean? So per acre, per, you know, different things. So you might have 2 or 3 different columns here that you actually show and calculate those for a couple of different ways to think about it. And so it really is nothing right or wrong. It's more just kind of take these as a starting point and do whatever makes sense for you. And whatever, and sometimes what makes sense for one decision on looking at it in one way might not be as good when you're looking at it in another way. So in another way, calculate it in it so that you can just make the comparison that makes sense for the decision you're making.